Have you ever heard of Aristotle? Oh, and by the way, that's a rhetorical question. So anyway, have you ever heard of Aristotle? In most people's books, Aristotle was one of the cleverest people ever to have lived. I mean, genius, really high-level genius stuff. Aristotle gave us formalized ethics. He gave us cosmology. He gave us forms of biology. He gave us meteorology, predicting the weather, stuff like that. He was an absolute genius. Nobody disputes that. The problem we've got to face with Aristotle, though, is that he was wrong about almost everything. So let's take cosmology. There was earth, and there was air, and there was then ether. This stuff outside the air. No one believes that anymore. No one buys that. Physics. Again, earth, air, fire, water. He was what you would call an elementalist. He was a reductivist. He was an essentialist. He believed in elements and these essential elements that made up the world around us. Biology. Aristotle believed... Sorry, this is difficult to say without giggling a little bit. Aristotle believed that women were monstrous. Abominations in the womb, I believe he called them at one point. Why? Well, because women, he claimed, didn't have as many teeth as men. Count your teeth. Guaranteed women have got as many teeth as men. And even if they didn't, they'd still not be monstrous. He also believed that men are hot-blooded and women are cold-blooded, like lizards or something. So he was wrong about that. He was completely wrong about ethics. He believed, in terms of human rights, that some people are born masters and some people are born slaves. So when we actually listen to what Aristotle said, when we look at what he wrote, we believe that he was wrong about almost everything he said. But he was a damn genius. So the question becomes with someone like Aristotle, why was he a genius? What was it about what he did and what he said that was so clever, that was so intelligent? Well, certainly what it definitely wasn't, was his ability to get things right. That's certainly not what Aristotle excelled at. He didn't excel at getting things right. In fact, he excelled at getting them wrong. But what he did excel at was changing the world, was being creative, was coming up with ideas that no one had had before, formalizing things in ways that no one had ever formalized them, creating entire disciplines. He created the discipline of physics, really. He created the discipline of metaphysics, if you're a philosopher. He created the discipline of meteorology. He created these disciplines. Amazing stuff. What a genius. Even though he was wrong. So now we ask the question, what are we examining kids on at school? And by the way, this is another rhetorical question. So what we tend to examine kids on are things like their ability to remember and then regurgitate, their ability to apply the knowledge that we give them. We tend to test them on things that are, as it were, stressful on working memory. We tend to test them on things that are stressful for people who are dyslexic. When we test kids, almost invariably, we test them and hope that they get things right. And if they don't, then they're put to the bottom of the class in some form or another. Aristotle, get to the bottom of the class. So this is what we're doing. We're testing kids on getting things right. We're testing kids on remembering things. We're testing kids on applying the knowledge that we give them. Here's a third rhetorical question, by the way. You ever heard of Bloom's taxonomy? Well, Bloom's taxonomy has what they call the higher order thinking strategies and the lower order thinking strategies, the hops and the lots. And the lower order thinking strategies include things like remembering and applying. The higher order thinking strategies include things like prioritizing, creativity, conceptualizing. All the things that Aristotle was really good at. And in fact, all the things that dyslexic kids tend to be really good at. And by the way, there's lots and lots of research to support this. You can go onto my Dyslexia Bytes site at www.dyslexiabytes.org, and there's a section on dyslexia and creativity, and my goodness, the evidence is overwhelming. Dyslexic kids are really, really creative. So if dyslexic kids are creative, and they have maybe poor working memory, and the geniuses of the world that we know about were creative but maybe wrong about a lot of stuff, and we're testing kids on working memory, on remembering, on applying, and on getting things right, I don't know, doesn't it strike you that there's something wrong? Doesn't it strike you that if the higher order thinking techniques are things like, or the higher order thinking strategies are things like creativity and prioritization, and the lower order thinking strategies are things like remembering and applying, and it's that we're testing kids on, then aren't we testing kids not on what learning is, but on what learning isn't? Now, this gets even more interesting because we know, more or less, that roughly between somewhere like 10 to 15% of the population are dyslexic. We also know that something like 4 to 5% of the higher education population is dyslexic. In other words, about a third to a half of dyslexic kids are getting through to higher education. And when they do get through, they drop out. There's a really, really high dropout rate. This seems to me like it's down to what the entire structure of education is in our society. This idea of having to remember things correctly. This idea of having to get them right. This idea of having to remember what we told you and apply it in the exam. Aristotle wouldn't have passed. And you see, if we keep testing kids on these things, if these are the frameworks we're judging learning and intelligence by, and if these are the pathways into higher education, and once you're in higher education, they are the pathways through higher education, then is it any wonder that as a society, we're failing the vast majority of children with dyslexia?